Good day, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. I'm delighted to be facilitating today. My name is Sasha Peterson. I am the CEO of the Science Interactive Group, but prior to that, have really spent a lifetime in enrollment technology, including more recently being CEO of TargetX. Before we get started, I just want to thank Inside Higher Ed for helping to create the environment for this webinar. We're thrilled to have such a great audience with us today. And we think it's going to be a really timely discussion given the many changes occurring, not only in the space in which we work every day, but our country and even the world. We got a terrific panel for this discussion today, and we're going to have them introduce themselves in a moment. But before that, I just want to call out that we are really excited and hopeful to make this an interactive webinar, and we'll have time for Q&A for our great panelists at the end, and would invite you all along the way to touch on that Q&A button you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom link and put in questions along the way that we'll cover at the end. As I said, I'm delighted to be the host and the moderator for this esteemed panel for this great discussion, and would love for you guys to introduce yourselves, maybe starting with you, Lisa.
Sure. Thanks, Sasha. My name's Lisa Branson. I'm the Senior Vice President for Client Development at Enrollment Fuel. I've been in higher education for nearly 30 years. I started when I was 2. I always like to tell that joke. And I've worked at a variety of different institutions across the country, 2-year public, 4-year private, and even a little stint in proprietary higher ed. So looking forward to hearing from my wonderful colleagues here today and hope to have a lively discussion. Thank you.
Terrific. Thanks, Lisa. Prithvi, how about you?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Sasha. Glad to be part of this very esteemed panel. My name is Prithvi Dasgupta. I lead North America operations for Lead Squared. I've been a techno-functional executive for the last 2 decades. I've created businesses and scaled businesses in that period. Started my career in banking financial services, had a large stint in US healthcare, and now, dabbling in US education as well. So glad to be here. Looking forward to this conversation.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. And Joe, last but not least.
Thanks, Sasha. So currently the Vice President of Online Operations for Ancora Education, but like Lisa, started in the industry when I was a toddler. It's been just over 25 years in just about every seat imaginable, from nonprofit 4-year to for-profit proprietary education, everything from academic advising, international advising, to campus president, to regional, to now running the online operations. So just a little bit of everything. So hopefully we can add some quality to this conversation today.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Joe. Really thrilled with the diversity of experiences we all have here, and I think it'll make for a great conversation. So in the spirit of making this interactive, we thought we'd kick off with a quick poll to really understand where you guys are at in terms of the challenges that you have. And at the beginning of the conversation, the webinar is entitled Meeting Students Where They Are, Reimagining Student Engagement in Higher Ed. To talk about meeting the students where they are, we really need to understand where they are today. And so, as I said at the top, we're living in a really dynamic environment. A lot of changes happening, and maybe starting at the very highest level. Over the last many years, there's been a tremendous number of technology changes and communications changes. So maybe, Lisa, can you talk a little bit about what you've observed in your experiences and the various changes that we've seen in communications to prospective and current students?
Oh, yeah, sure. Thanks, Sasha, for turning it over to me. So a lot of focus on personalized communications, or really honestly a lack thereof in higher ed. A lot of what we see out there is just standardized, really transactional communications. I mean, this is what we do, is kind of work with folks in this communications area, marketing. So a lot of people think that the personalized communications, like the Dear Lisa communications, that's enough personalization. That is not enough personalization at this juncture and point in time. So I think really using CRMs to maximize capabilities beyond personalization that's just Dear Lisa. Contact that's relevant to the funnel stage of the student. So working with a lot of schools on student search and kind of top of the funnel activities. And, I see a lot of schools that are trying to push students to apply. They're not ready. They're not ready for that. We've got to really think about where students are. Are they sophomores, juniors? Are they adult students? and really speaking to their needs and wants and desires at that time. So really thinking about the buyer's journey overall is super important in communications. And I think students expect us to know those things now. I mean, AI has changed sort of that landscape and makes your ability to personalize things just amplified. And I just don't think we do a great job. Like we've got information out there about demographics, tons of access to information, but I don't think in higher ed we always use that very well. We don't look at behavioral activities and then adjust our communications based on what we see students doing. We have all this ability to track activities that students are taking on websites and beyond that, and we don't develop communications that are specific to that. So I also know we're going to talk a little bit about speed and kind of the balance of the communications being personalized and then also the expectations of speed. So when students kind of have this 24/7 mindset, the hot now mindset, and expect us to be available at any moment. And so I think it's kind of balancing those two things. How can you make things personalized, but also make sure we're getting to students in a quick way, in a 24/7 way.
Yeah, the data point's a really interesting one because I think all of us hear how often people want to be data-driven decision makers, and you collect a lot of data, but the usage of it really is infrequent, I would say. Prithvi, you talked a little bit about the various industries that you've seen. Maybe we can talk more broadly about the evolution of communications and technology in your experience.
Sure. I think Lisa mentioned quite a few times, I think the change in buyer behavior and buyer decision-making process. I think one thing we are seeing across a lot of these consumer-driven verticals, and education included now, is the need for the decision makers to choose when and how they want to consume information. So a decision is not pushed into them. They don't want to be interacting, without being in control. So a large part of that being self-served is what we are seeing across, whether it's healthcare, banking, financial services, and very specifically education as well. Students don't want to find out themselves at their own time and at their own channel of choice. So I think we all know that ground reality. I'll double click a little bit on the word personalization because it's used so often. There are various ways you can, sort of break this up. And I think a good way and a simple way to break this up is also what do you personalize at different stages of the student journey. So there is a top of funnel personalization, which is obviously sort of what people call the digital door. Students coming in, allowing them to serve up curated content basis what their interests are, and so on and so forth. But what do you do when the personalization needs are there, sort of middle of funnel? Now they've already about to apply or just have already applied. Now what do you do there? I think at that point in time, there is an element of the human touch as well. So what I'm seeing is the impact of digitalization and AI and all other tools upfront on top of funnel is huge. As it comes towards the middle of the funnel, you have more of a human touch, and it's a balancing act a little bit of who nudges and who interacts, and then sort of gives you a rough structure. So that I think works very well. And we'll speak a little bit more. I think we have spoken in this group also a few times about the concept of influenced self-serve. So whilst you would like your students to be self-served, but you would still want to influence it. And there are obviously ways you could intelligently do that. And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later, Sasha, as well.
Yeah. So as I said at the top, we're in a very dynamic time. Everything is changing. Communications, I think, is maybe the top of the pyramid of the changes that are happening. Getting a little bit more current. Periodically, there are shifts in demographics as well. I mean, I think any of us who have experienced education recruitment in the last couple of decades remember in the early 2000s, there was a big decline. We're on the cusp of that today. And so what does that look like, and how are people thinking about that? Maybe, Joe, you can kick off the discussion about demographic shifts.
Yeah, and I think it really is giving everyone pause and reflecting internally in terms of product offering and how we're serving our students and meeting where today's student really is, right? Because as we perhaps see that cliff that everyone's talking about of the declining traditional 18, 19-year-old high school graduate coming to our institutions, we really have to identify where are today's students, how do we compensate for the potential decline, and what should we be offering to make sure that we're meeting the demand of today's students. So, you look at the adult learner, the degree completer, even skilled trades, right? Areas where, that it's not your traditional student where the decline is, but industry is calling for that. So really as causing institutions like ours to reflect internally and really decide who we want to be and how we can be what our students need us to be.
Yeah, yeah, and definitely top of mind. I mean, as you may have noticed that initial poll that we asked, the number 2 concern folks on this webinar have is around demographics. Lisa, have you seen any reactions or changes to people's strategies in the work you're doing?
Well, one thing I wanted to point out, and Sasha, I know we talked about this a little the other day, but also I spent some time with Bill from NCAN, and we actually did a presentation about some of the shifting demography, and we really focused a bit on the demographic cliff and kind of the fear that is around that. And we laughed because, we talked about if that's a cliff that we were going to fall off of, that would be the kind of cliff we'd like to fall off of, because it really is a gradual decline. Like what the witchy data that's out there really shows that there's a 13% decline that's projected by 2041. And so, I mean, that's like less than 1% a year. So, and there's some areas of the country that are growing, like the South and West. So I think it depends on where you are in the country. I think that it really means, like Joe was kind of talking about, maybe it's less of a cliff and more of a shift. Because I think that we really need to think outside of the box about our first gen populations, our non-trad populations, and how we can communicate and reach out to students that require high touch, personalization, and family-oriented communication. So that's kind of a lot of the shifts that I think we need to make as a higher education community, based on some of the demographic changes or shifts instead of cliff.
Yeah, that's a good point. We definitely talked about that the other day. I admitted that I hadn't peeled the onion back enough to understand it and just heard the headlines of demographic cliff and found that quite scary. And it turns out that over the next 5 years, it's like a 3% total decline, which certainly feels like as you said, if you're going to fall off something, that seems like a pretty good one to fall off. You mentioned something that I think is worth digging into a little bit more also, is just the shift in how we as educators or education offering institutions are thinking about the various product offerings. Joe, you mentioned degree completion as an example. The idea of certificates and smaller segmented classes. I was talking to a college president last week, actually, and he was mentioning smaller liberal arts school that focuses on traditional undergraduate enrollment, which is, of course, the most directly impacted from this looming demographic shift, and was trying to push his team to think a little bit differently and say, we need to think about people as lifelong learners and not think about our product as a 4-year one and done, but starting there and then coming back for additional trainings, coming back for additional certificates, coming back for additional degrees, maybe over time, but really thinking about it a little bit more broadly. Wondering, if Joe, you have any thoughts about kind of the evolution of how people think about programs as well.
Yeah, and I think that goes hand in hand to the conversation earlier about our student looking for instant gratification, right? Because I think it's not only the evolving credential, but it's speed to career and speed to that.
Yeah.
The dollar, right? And so more and more institutions should be looking to stackable credentials. Do you start with a certificate that can stack, into an associate's that can then stack into a bachelor's program, right? So that you're creating not just the lifelong learner, but the lifelong, career person that's giving back to the community at the same time. So they're using those small chunks of education and the industry recognized credentials that they're earning along the way to apply to the workforce immediately, but then come back to you for the next level and for the career advancement opportunities. So, the idea of the stackable credential is absolutely should be forefront for most of us. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then as we continue to kind of layer down, I think to kind of the most contemporary changes that we're all experiencing, it's hard to ignore the geopolitical changes that are happening. It's harder to get into the United States. It's harder to stay in the United States. Budgets are in flux. That initial poll that we put up there showed budget as kind of the number one concern for everybody. Um, I think at this point, we're going to put up a second poll just to understand how you guys are reacting to some of these changes. But Prithvi, maybe you could speak a little bit to what you're hearing. I know you're spending a lot of time with enrollment professionals these days.
Yeah, Sasha, thanks. So I think I reiterate a little bit of what Joe also mentioned. I think if you break down this problem into a business problem, we have seen this recur multiple times. It's not something which is new and happening for the first time. So there are always macroeconomic changes, there are government policies which change and impact businesses in one way or the other. I think what's in businesses' control is really a part of how do you pivot your offerings and products and services to match those sort of changes, one. And two, you figure out, better segments and niches. I mean, we all do that. We have been doing that, and it's no different here. There is a certain segment of the student community which will change for sure. But then there is also parallelly something which will also increase and provide opportunities once you have that right sort of offerings, which I think a lot of organizations are now focusing on. So whether it's online, and maybe Joe can speak a little bit more to it, how do you break up a longish sort of program into more palatable pieces, if that's what it takes. See, the concept of what you described, a life longer, is also not new. I mean, when we look at businesses, we look at customer lifetime value, and we actually, evaluate businesses' health basis what their lifetime value is against, the cost of acquiring that customer, as if you will. So I think those concepts are already there. I'm glad we are talking about student success also now in equal terms, and I think those are areas to focus on, irrespective of what the impact of some of these macroeconomic changes bring to the industry.
Yeah, and Joe, anything you want to add on that?
Yeah, just again, wholeheartedly agree, right? In terms, especially, to the example of asking about the online student and breaking things down into chunks. It's not even always just the degree or the credential that needs to be broken down, but the timeline and the delivery and the courses, right? So I think for the adult learner, for the online learner, the days of 5 classes over a traditional 16-week semester are unpalatable. It's not a caseload that most can manage, right? So it's how do you turn that into a 5-week cycle or a 6-week cycle, so that you can come in, take the class, move on to the next one, and feel that sense of accomplishment to keep going, right? Because that's also really important for today's student online, is that sense of completion and motivation. To know that the finish line is getting closer and closer. And when you don't break it down into those smaller chunks, like Preeti was saying, that often is a reason for student decline and lack of retention.
Yeah, and I think what you were saying earlier about the stackable credentials is echoed by our participants here today on the webinar. Is that the number one change people have made in the last 3 years on that last poll was shown as programs. So I think that's a great sign that people are learning and adapting. Lisa, how about you? What are you seeing? I know you talk to a lot of enrollment professionals as well.
Yeah, I mean, though, I guess I really want to go back to the budgetary constraints that people are kind of experiencing out there, since that was sort of a number one polling opportunity. I guess what I want to let everybody know out there is everybody's in the same boat. There's just a lot of uncertainty around in the political landscape. I've seen a lot of folks kind of afraid to move forward with things. I've seen schools that are out there that are now, even for small amounts of money, $250, let's say, having to get approval by boards or presidents. There's just, kind of a lot of fear around that. So I guess, anything that you can do to kind of amplify your systems, technology, get rid of some red tape, I think are all going to be important things as we move forward with sort of this era of kind of uncertainty with all of the things that are happening at the federal level.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us know that the change and evolution is a certainty. what I think is different about today's time is that the number of changes and the types of changes just feels so uncertain, and it's almost cliche to say it's unprecedented, but it does feel that way. That when you see changes coming in policy and budget overnight, programs being ripped away, it makes it difficult to make long-term planning. So that I think sets the context of the changes we're working through. I want to turn the mirror on ourselves a little bit and think about ourselves as consumers. Right, all of us have experienced changes on campus where we work with people, and as consumers, as we've seen it as well. Recognizing geopolitical changes, technology changes, communication changes, preferential changes. I wonder what you guys think are the most impactful changes that you've seen, either directly that you've experienced or with campuses that you're working with. What's worked? And Lisa, since you're on the stage, maybe you kick us off on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, just sort of trying to have flexible options for students, like what we're talking about, making sure that that we're meeting students kind of where they are. I like to have lots of different ways to gather information. I think the consumers now are much more savvy. I know we're always kind of saying that, but we're almost like overloaded with information. So a lot of times I see schools that have websites are out of date. Websites are being used to try to meet too many needs of constituents. So instead of being like a recruitment tool, which is always what I feel like the website should be there to do for institutions or any company that's selling services, it really ends up being like we're talking to faculty and staff, we're talking to alumni, we're talking to current students. And I think there's sort of a confusion out there about that. So I like when I see something that's clean, easy, great to navigate, wonderful ways to find information and curate it, because there's just so much. I guess I'm just thinking about that from my own perspective. Everybody's like, I went to the doctor today. It's like Google MD. I went in and I said, okay, I read this already, so I know what's wrong with me. She's like, okay, Google MD.
Yeah, the up to date, I think, it feels like such low hanging fruit, but I feel like weekly I still see campus websites telling me about what COVID protocols are.
Oh, yes.
And I think, not diminishing the fact that it is still something that exists among us. I don't think we can say the same protocols you had in 2020 are appropriate at this time. Joe, how about you? Have you seen anything particularly impactful?
Yeah, and I think I was a little bit motivated by Lisa's answer, right? When she talked about the website and is it talking to faculty, is it talking to staff? And really it comes down to knowing your audience and communicating to your audience correctly. And I think a big shift that I've seen over the past 5 to 10 years is really understanding that the audience as a student is a customer, right? And the traditional four-year institutions, maybe borrowing some of the best practices from the proprietary sectors, really focusing on customer service and not just internal service, right? So really understanding that the student is a customer and making sure that the quality of service is there to keep them engaged and keep them going and keep them wanting to come back for more has been a shift, and a philosophy that I think more traditional institutions have begun to embrace more and more.
Yeah, I think that's a great call out. That when I first got involved with CRM, we went out of our way to make sure you did not call it a customer. The C was not customers, anything but customer. And that president that I mentioned earlier that was talking about adding different programs, he was very direct in talking about products, talking about consumers, talking about customers. And I think you're right that it's an evolution that has begun. And I understand this is a sacred space. Education is a special place. It is a life-changing place. And so looking at it just as, the same thing as going to the mall, I don't know that I would endorse that either, but I do think, to your point, if you think about it from a service perspective, it should be a lot more thoughtful to say this is a mutually beneficial relationship in which a student is getting a lot of education and the campus is getting a lot in terms of revenue. Prithvi, I wonder, with your experience in financial services and healthcare more recently as well, if you've seen any interesting changes, because I think a lot of time it's helpful to look outside of what is often an insulated industry like education to get inspiration on things that might really be working or different ways to think about things.
Yes, Sasha. And I think it's an interesting question you asked. We were just discussing this with a colleague a couple of days back. Uh, See, what I find very unique about the consumer or the customer in education, which is the student and the associated set thereof, is they are digital first. In fact, they are more digital first than some of the other verticals. Because healthcare, the adoption of, say, a mobile-based search is still at a certain percentage. Students today are just only on the phone. I mean, their view of the world is through their phone. And that is very, very unique. In any other consumer business, you would not find that. And they are the first adopters of the technology which we are talking about these days. I mean, AI, Chat GPT, we use X amount of Chat GPT today. I think the student community uses it exponentially more. The question to ask ourselves is, how are we going to adjust to that reality, and how does our sort of top of funnel, middle of funnel, bottom of funnel react to that? We spoke about personalization, we spoke about self-serve. They are actually asking ChatGPT, compare two institutes and tell me, what are we doing around that, and how does that inquiry come into a system like Lead Squared, for example? I mean, we are also thinking that through. I'll be honest, this is a problem to be solved. So it's a completely new channel through which, and I don't think too many institutes have, approached it that way, but I think most people will be forced to now to that reality. So it's a very, very unique thing, Sasha, that this is mobile first, this is digital first consumers we are talking about addressing. And there's a big discrepancy between what they are experienced in and how they look at the real world situation, and how operationally we are equipped internally to address all of these across the student journey. So I think that'll be very interesting to see. Obviously, technology has a big role to play, but also I think leadership and the element of reskilling a lot of our operations will also need to be looked at in parallel.
Yeah, I mean, I think change, particularly technological change, takes time. I think higher education and campuses in general have a way to be particularly conservative about change, and I don't think that's always bad. Just to be clear, let's spend a little bit of time then talking about technology specifically. We have another poll to ask what you all are thinking about this as well. We talked a lot, in the last few minutes about the evolving use of technology. Right. And you think all the way back to 20, 25 years ago, LMS was sort of the first big revolution of technology. Then I would say maybe 15 years ago, CRM became, a really core part of it. And I think in the same way that LMS took a while to become a truly mission critical part of a college campus, CRM initially was viewed as this thing that's out there. I think today CRM is also viewed as a mission critical part of campus. And then today, since after that evolved into marketing automation and where that fit into CRM. And then today, in the last couple of years, chat GPT and kind of generative AI in general has really taken it. So a lot happening. We recognize that change is hard, change is slow. How do people think about this in context? If you're not thinking about one product you need to deliver a good experience for a student, but 3, 4, 5 different products, and that's just the student-centric view. Now you think more broadly about, as a campus, you also have a responsibility to your faculty, to your staff. How do you make that overall experience good? I don't know who wants to take the first stab at this one, but how should we be people thinking about it? How do we do this right?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in. Firstly, I wanted to kind of echo your sentiment, Sasha, kind of around sometimes there's more of a pause in higher education moving forward with some new idea or new technology. But I wanted to, it made me kind of laugh because I've never seen higher ed move so fast as to start implementing AI checkers on on all of student assignments. Like that had to be like so fast fastly and quickly implemented, more than anything I've ever seen. So I thought that was kind of funny as we were going through and talking about that. But beyond that, the AI, I was interested to see that the AI selection there on the poll was kind of a little bit lower than some of the other things like the marketing automation and everything. I feel like one thing I've noticed when people bring in new technologies onto campus, that there's not a lot of coordination or collaboration, and not necessarily thinking strategically about how all of those new technical components work together. So I'm just thinking of a few instances lately that I've run into when I'm talking to different campuses, and people are implementing like a new Conflow in their CRM, and then also are working with an AI partner, and those things are not talking. So students are getting the same messages or similar messages from different entities on the same day that look like they're kind of from the same institution, but maybe even not. They might not even look like they're from the same institution. So I think sort of thinking high level about what all those communications look like, how they work together, is really important, kind of taking a step back. I know it's exciting to kind of hop in on the newest thing, but really thinking about it from a strategic perspective, I think is important.
Yeah, I think you stole most of the words out of my mouth, Lisa. I think, it's fun, right? We're educators. We like innovation. We want new things. So we want all to play with the new toys. But, it's important that we make sure that they can all talk to each other. Information is easily available in one spot, right? If we're trying to understand our student, we shouldn't have to look in 4 different systems to understand who we're talking to, and then avoid duplication, to your point, right? So there's, my FA team is on a different CRM and, communications platform than my admissions team is. So how do I know who's talking to who about what? And really just making sure that all of those dots connect so that you have a 360-degree view of your student, can easily get lost when you start to plug and play lots of new shiny bells and whistles in technology.
Yeah, it's not just duplicative, it's also sometimes conflicting information that you'll get from the same institution. So Joe, let me keep you on the stage here and ask you this. Because the 2 CRMs on campus is a great example of this. Knowing what we know today, thinking about all the technological innovation and new products and new ideas that have come onto the table in the last, take whatever time period you want, 10 years, 20 years, knowing what you know today, what would you do differently?
Oh, well, we're definitely getting on one CRM, right? So one client, right, where everyone has that 360-degree view of the student. I think that's paramount. If we can figure that out, I think the rest in terms of being able to deliver the customer service is really easy. Not really easy, but a lot easier. And I think also, we talked about making sure things can talk to each other. So the other, if I could build, my perfect marketing platform, right, it would be able to pull from our CRM and understand where the student just inquired, right? So maybe not even that far in the funnel, but I know exactly what program they're interested in. I know who their admission advisor that is going to be assigned to them. I know all of the things about them from the minute they come into my system because we're automated, and I can start sending communication to them, showing that there's the support and putting a face to a name, and this is your advisor, and I know this is your program, so it's not a generic thank you page, right? So I think, it's a combination of that instant gratification plus as much personalization as possible. And once you have a system that can pull everything in together, I think that becomes a lot easier to execute on.
Yeah. Lisa, any thoughts?
I just echo what Joe says. Just sort of that balance between the speed and the personalization, I think, is important. I did a little bit of research here and just found that, responding within 5 minutes of a student request makes a student 400 times more likely to convert. Within an hour, 10 times more likely to convert, at least within 24 hours. That reduces the chance of conversion. If you're more than 24 hours past, it reduces your conversion by 50% or more. But more than 90% of students say that if they received personalized communications from colleges, it makes them want to explore the college and institution further. And if they received personalized communications, it influenced their college decisions. So you've got to, you kind of got to find kind of that balance between the two. So And again, I just can't re-emphasize enough, like, we know so much about these students. We know where they've been on our sites. We know all these multitude of things that you can find out through consumer agencies about students and families. And we don't always use that as effectively as we could to communicate with students how they need us to.
Yeah, super interesting. I mean, I think over the course of this conversation, a number of times we talked about the people's need and appetite, at least, if not a need for really instant information. Sometimes that's easier said than done. Uh, Knowing what we know today, which is that people really want personalized, instant information, knowing that, sometimes that's possible, sometimes it's not. What are you seeing as successful strategies for people to be thinking about this? Maybe Prithvi, you can kick us off on this.
Yeah, I think uh, very relevant, Sasha. So it's easy for us to say, personalization and speed. And then there is this other angle I'll also like to bring along with personalization and speed is scale. So you need to, it's just
Mm.
one student, it's very easy to react in 5 minutes and talk to him or her. But now you're talking thousands, now a question of scale comes in. So see, and we also, I'll sort of triangulate this into, we discussed, better way to deploy technology for it. See, it's a given. You cannot do this without technology. So that's a given. AI is a given. We use AI and we are touched by AI and have been for the last 10 years, 15 years, maybe 20 years or more. Our refrigerator has AI. Our television has AI. Our car has AI. I mean, it's there everywhere. So it's no longer a question. Question is how do we benefit from it? It's not going to take the jobs. I think that's very far-fetched. But are we utilizing this efficiently? And now coming back very specifically to the self-serve content personalization. See, the personalization also extends beyond the student in this case, because there are influencers like families, extended families, parents, peers, friend circle, and the personalization actually needs to extend even to them. A parent is also searching on the web and comparing institutes as much as the student is. So how do you now, and the personalization exercise or algorithm might have to be slightly different for both, but towards the same objective. So I think, when we look at, and this is a good time as any to drive a lot of internal efficiencies, Sasha, I think, but it has to be driven by an outcome. I normally recommend people to figure out an outcome. So if the outcome is that we have to achieve X level of personalization in a certain timeline, then you work backwards from there. So the pushback towards technology is not there, the fear is not there, I think. And then the balancing act we all spoke about, that how do you make life easier, even internally using technology? It's just not about the student experience, it's also about the counselor experience, it's also about the faculty experience, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a very, very interesting times ahead for the overall vertical.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm delighted with a number of interesting questions coming in and want to leave time for that. Before we do that, though, kind of wrap things up and change from theoretical to practical. I always like to have actionable insights when I go to a conference, when I come to a webinar. I asked a few minutes ago, knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently? And that's a great hypothetical question. I think, Joe, you brought up a couple of really good actionable points if you were to start from scratch. So starting with you, maybe knowing what you know now, not being able to go in a time machine and do things differently, to achieve some of what you described, which is pulling more data, kind of what Lisa's been talking about this whole time. What can people do? What could you do, right away to think about how can I begin implementing actionable change that will result in a better experience for people going forward?
Yeah, I think, identifying the internally, right, systems that you have, look at where communication points are, APIs, right? Do I have two different systems, but is there a way for them to speak to each other, right? So don't be afraid to knock on your IT's doors and use that word API, right? So making sure that our tools can mesh and add value to one another. I think the other thing is really important, and Preeti, I'm glad that you talked about the user experience just a second ago, right? You said personalizing it to the student and then maybe even to the family member, but then you throw in the advisor, the faculty member. I think it's really important that our tools that we use internally are customizable to the user, right? So as an advisor, as an academic advisor, do I understand who my caseload is? Can I easily just see my caseload, or am I sorting through an institution's worth of data? What is my access about, right? So it's about the connectivity, that the information is all in the right spot, but then really usability. What is the user experience? And I don't think that we spend enough time, as an industry, focused on the user experience as much as we do the student experience. And so I think that was another thing that I would take from this.
Yeah, those are great suggestions. So basically a systems audit to understand what's there as a starting point, because again, you can't wipe the slate clean. The slate is what it is. So understanding really what that is, and then thinking about what that journey looks like from a student standpoint. Also really, great process to do, whether you're on campus or, in a business. Those are some great suggestions. Lisa, how about you? What could you suggest for people to take action, this afternoon or tomorrow?
Yeah, I don't know, because what I'm thinking is maybe like a bigger picture kind of thing, because I
And
don't.
next week.
Yeah, maybe next week. I mean, I like Joe's view of kind of looking at all the technologies and how they integrate, and I'm almost thinking like a lot of schools just need to take that step back, like what he's talking about, and look at everything from a big picture. That's the best place to start. Like, are these systems and technologies meeting your needs, and how are they doing that? Are you focusing on your vision? Are you looking at the strategic plan, and are you implementing things that kind of move you forward in that direction? Are they making your life easier? Are they getting you information about students that's relevant and timely? And so I think I'm just really echoing what the team here has said, but take that time to step back and look at everything from a big picture view. That'd be my first recommendation.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And then Prithvi, I think you may have a unique perspective on this question, as with Lead Squared, when you're coming on campus and beginning to think about installing a new CRM or new technology on campus, you're in the midst of people rethinking things. So with that view, with that lens, how do you guys think about it, and what do you encourage your customers to do?
Yeah, and, you're right. For us, it's slightly different than what Joe and Lisa were mentioning, because as we come in, we are a technology organization, so we come in and implement technology, but it is towards an outcome. So what is work in progress for us, in all honesty, is being more and more aligned to that outcome with that institute, or with a healthcare clinic, or with a banking financial services organization. And what that has meant for us is, over the last few years, we've started focusing more and more on the end consumer of our customers. So it's more of a B2B2C for us, and whilst it's a B2C for someone like Joe. So how do we actually influence, and how do we impact all of these touch points which a student is having, and just not be, a neural network, which is the CRM, and it's being internally used by X number of users, and just stop there. So what that has meant for us is, we have gone top of funnel. We have a digital door product called FlowStack, which is, I think, in its initial phases of, doing justice to that influenced self-serve I was talking about. We are looking at AI now from a completely different lens. It is just not about, only one isolated use case here. It has been used, the last decade. Machine learning has been part of the Lead Squared suite anyways. But now we are seeing, how can this sort of newer technologies and advancements in AI help assimilating the data we were speaking about? How does it help, Joe and other practitioners sort of segment students in the right categories, and then eventually help the counselors and the marketing engines and the personalization engines to then take over from there. So for us, it's been very interesting coming from, a technology viewpoint, but it's very exciting as well.
Yeah, great, thank you. All right, so before we turn to QA, want to have one last poll pop up. Prithvi, shared a little bit about what his organization does, but would love to get your views on whether this is something to double click on, essentially. As I said, we got a number of really, really great questions. and we're going to try to tackle as many as we can over the next few minutes. Colleen, thanks for starting us out. And I think a really great question to start with, we've been thematically talking about contacting students on their own terms. We also know, I'm elaborating a little bit on your question, that sometimes people's terms are leave me alone, but we have our own needs and objectives as institutions to perhaps nudge those students along through the application process, deposit process, whichever step part of the funnel that they're in. So the question is, would the group discourage those in higher ed from calling or texting students to inquire about the status of their application or decision? How would you recommend encouraging interaction with this theme of meeting students where they are? Lisa, maybe you can kick us off.
Yeah, I think, again, funnel stage here is really important. So, I mean, if we're talking specifically about applicants, or that's a pretty high level of interest, indicator of interest, in my opinion. So, but if we're talking about suspect level communications, let's maybe start there at super top of the funnel. I know there have been lots of times in history where we've gone back and gone to our non-responders, people that we maybe go through and we do student search and we have suspect names of students and we go and send communications and then they don't respond and we go back. I would definitely discourage that because it now has become really difficult to get messages through to students, especially via email. So I think data hygiene and really understanding what the customer is doing is super important, because there were the Gmail changes that came out maybe 2 or 3 years ago really influenced what is kind of happening out there in the communication space, especially when probably 75% of the emails that you're sending are to a Gmail address to your students. So it's being really mindful about where students are and whether or not they've indicated interest. And if they haven't indicated interest, to really be cautious about the types, cadence, and kinds of follow-up that you do with them, because it can really hurt your ability to communicate with students that might be further on in the file, as an example. But from an application perspective, I mean, those students have a pretty high level of interest. I think, try to meet them where they are the best they can, but I'd be definitely interested in hearing what others might have to say about that.
Yeah, so you're suggesting kind of an opt-in almost. Let students, in the spirit of meeting them where they are, let them tell you where they are, and then use those means to connect with it. Any other thoughts on this question? I've got a couple other technology themed ones.
Just one thing, Sasha, I think I would also recommend just adding a self-serve option there as well. I mean, it's an easy enough thing to do, and then it solves the purpose. You're not pushing, and if they're really interested, they'll come and find out what the status is. Just make it easy on less friction.
That makes sense too. Yeah, so push, not pull. Find the right balance of both. Really, really great suggestions. So another question, and I don't know why, Joe, I feel like you may have immediate insight into this, is around how we suggest offer for remarketing for leads that don't complete the enrollment process. They've done everything leading up to enrolling, but stopped just short of beginning the program and stopped answering any and all communications efforts. So these kind of, stop outs and dropouts in the funnel. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I call them our ghosts, right? They ghost us. And so, again, it comes back to, in terms of identifying the reason and what technologies you might have at your campuses, right? So for me, I want to go back and challenge, that advisor. Let's go back and listen to the interview, right? What did we miss? Because I think if someone just stops communicating with us, that means that there was an obstacle, a challenge, some fear that we didn't help address and overcome in that conversation, whether it be in an interview or through, some of our self-service options that we have, and find out what we missed to make sure that we don't avoid that later, right? Because if I build the trust with you, if I help you understand that there's nothing to be frightened about, even if you're going to tell me that you don't want to move forward in the process, you'd call me back and you wouldn't ghost me, right? So for me, I always like to just, again, back to the technology question, right? Step back and take a look back at the initial conversations with that student to find out what we missed, because if they ghosted you, that we missed something, and we owe it to them to do a better job.
Yeah, that's a really great perspective. Rosalie has a really good and I think insightful point that maybe Prithvi you can kick us off on. She asked, personalization, AI bots, and automation seem to be in conflict. Considering that we know prospective students highly value authentic interaction, how does authentic communication and AI work together?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because you are right. I think if deployed the wrong way, they will be in conflict, and it may not solve that purpose. I think the right way to look at is what you mean and your institute means and wants to achieve in the personalization realm. Then whether the communication basis that personalization is through an AI agent, is through a human, is through standard marketing automation channels, is also the next problem to be solved for. It is unlikely that it is a 0 or 1 here. It is either this or that. It probably is a mix of all of these together, and consciously the deployment has to be designed in a way that they are not in conflict. So whilst I agree with what you have said, but that's because of wrong deployment rather than the technologies themselves.
Yeah, well said. Lisa, you seem to have a enthusiastic embracing of this topic as well. You want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think just really making sure that you're using again, back to using all the information that you have at your fingertips to communicate with students about the things that they're interested in. I mean, again, so many times like the marketing automation platforms that I see are set up just to have very transactional communications that aren't specific to all the information that we know about students. And so using that artificial intelligence or behavioral scoring or all of the website visits that you're able to track and developing plans and automations that go along with that, I think help to develop trust with students so that they don't ghost you later on, because you really have met students where they are and are speaking to them how they want to be spoken to.
Yeah, makes sense. So that's a little bit on technology. Let's shift now to messaging, which I think is almost a precursor to the technology that you're introducing. Just as a sidebar, Molly made a comment that I think was interesting during the discussion about ChatGPT, and said that she went in while we were talking about it, large state school, compared us with regional state schools, and found that very accurate. So that's interesting, and I just highlight that to say that the messaging that all of us are putting out, no matter where, is no longer just in our direct control. In the olden days, meaning more than 2 years ago, when you created a website, the main way that would be consumed is through Google. You look at that up, you find your campus, and you're controlling that messaging. Now, you need to be aware that all of the information out there is being synthesized by a machine and put it out there. So I think really important to be thinking about how you're putting it out there and how it could be interpreted. And so to that end, Christine asked an interesting question that asks, how can a college with 2 campuses and completely different demographics create a marketing plan that serves both types of communities? I don't know, Lisa, have you dealt with this kind of situation before? Maybe you can help out with that as a starting point.
I mean, yeah, I feel like it's not going to be able to be the same communication plan. Like, however you can incorporate segmentation and variable content, I think is going to be really important in your marketing automation. You're going to need to speak to those students differently, or else you're not going to ever achieve the results that you want. So I know that kind of might make it more complicated in some ways, but I think there's a lot of ways you can use the technology to kind of, again, meet you where you are and make it simpler. But again, I'd be interested, Joe, I know some of your background is you've worked with multiple campuses and probably have a lot of experience in this area. So.
Yeah, and you're spot on, right? There can't be the same message, because I bet you if that college is using a single voice to market to 2 campuses with completely different demographics, one is doing better than the other, right? In terms of enrollment and capacity. So I think you need to find a voice that talks to the audience, that shows that you understand the student in your geography, right, in your community, and their needs that they're coming to you with separately. And that's the reason why your institution has a satellite campus, right? It's you understand the needs of the community and you're addressing them. And I think that's a great story to tell. And it could still be a singular message, but so long as you're talking to both audiences in terms of understanding the needs are different, and who you're serving and why you have different locations, that would be the route I would go. Definitely stay away from a one voice for all of your students.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just think about it as you have the same output of a product, but different people consuming that have different end results they're seeking, not necessarily everyone looking at it the exact same way.
And
Really,
different
really good point,
reasons,
Joe.
right? And different reasons for wanting to consume the product, right? So make sure you speak to their why.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So Prithvi, going back to experience you all have when you go on campuses and talk to people about new systems, Molly also asked a challenge that we, I guess, said, a question in the form of a statement. A challenge we have is different answers for different students on AI chatbots and knowledge bases, what campus, what type of student, new versus continuous. How do you think about gathering all this information that's being distributed through different systems to make sure you get consistency, whether the message is the same or tweaked for those people?
Yeah, and I think this is a conversation in itself. So, but I'll try and keep it as succinct as possible. So this is a very layered problem, Sasha. I think what's been happening in the industry also is, like I said, AI has been around and technology has been around for decades now. It is that the marketing, two things have happened. One, the rate of improvement in that technology has gone up drastically, very quickly, which is why it's come into our notices and day-to-day experiences. And two, the marketing engines of a lot of organizations and analysts and consultants have picked up on that, and now it's become this big buzz. It's been around for long, and it'll get its own. Now, why I mentioned that is because of that sort of bells and whistles and hype and marketing budgets being thrown into this by a lot of organizations, such as ourselves as well, there is sort of discrepant buying patterns. So people, just get technology onboarded, a set of technologies, and hope it'll work out. Like I said in a previous answer also, the thing is to figure out basis and outcome, and then be very, very sensitive to what's going to work for you and what wouldn't, and choose not only the technology, but also the vendors accordingly. Because today it's very easy to purchase, but it's very, very difficult to actually get value out of a lot of these bells and whistles which are being sold in the name of AI and technology and efficiency. So that's one part. The other part is, it is garbage in, garbage out to a large extent. So unless you have a good handle on your fundamental data set, and I think, nobody will have perfect data. Nobody has perfect data. That's a misnomer. But what is an acceptable quality of data in your organization? Is it, for example, the word I use is it AI ready data also, so is it able to be consumed by even the most smartest of algorithms? However unstructured it might be, it still needs some structure. So how good, bad that is, all of those things I think has to be looked at together before you make a call and do a decision, how you deploy and what you solve for. That solves for a lot of these downstream problems from happening.
Yeah, great. Thank you. In the spirit of actionable ideas, Joe, you spoke earlier about stackable credentials, which I think is really important. Paulette was asking about how to boost enrollment and I think we all know kind of baseline enrollment growth on campus is not as fast as enrollment growth online. That is a known fact, I think, digestible. Paulette asks, how can flexible learning options like hybrid or online modular format influence enrollment decisions? Should this be introduced to boost enrollment? How did you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think it's understanding your customer and your student and where they are, right? So I think what you're doing is, without the ability for a hybrid, right? If you're a traditional brick and mortar institution, that the ability to provide the schedule flexibility that today's student is looking for is going to be nearly impossible, right? Today's adult learner, the degree completer, we don't have 3 to 5 days to come back to campus for a few hours a day, right? So introducing that hybrid model, even if you're not willing to jump into the deep end of 100% distance and online, at least adding that hybrid model, allows that face-to-face 1 day a week, 2 days a week, day or evening, and then the rest of it can be supplemented through distance education. And I think that opens up the door tremendously, because a lot of times we're just closing ourselves off to a population that we could serve because we don't have the flexibility in our scheduling, and that opens up a world of opportunity for you.
Super helpful. Thanks. All right. We have 2 minutes left and 2 questions left. So not to put you on the spot, but you have 1 minute to answer this question. Lisa. Denise asks, treating a student like a customer can lead to the quote, customer is always right thinking. We know this is not always true. How do you balance the student as a customer with a student as a learner?
Yeah, I think that's really a challenge. And I remember when I first kind of started my foray into higher education, we had a lot of folks that had kind of done all their student personnel administration courses that were in our student life office, and that every experience that a student had was an educational opportunity. And yes, that is true. But at the same time, we have to try to balance that and find a way to meet students where they are. If they need to move their room because their roommate and they just can't get along, causing a bad experience, students not going to class because of it, or what have you, whatever might be occurring, we need to listen to that and not make students go through bad experiences. We need to be responsive to them, not let their emails sit for 2 weeks because we don't have time to get to them, and just try to find ways to treat them like customers, at least in the way we respond to them, and the availability of information, understanding too that they are there to learn. I get it. It's a hard balance.
Yeah, thank you. And then Prithvi, let's end with you. Michael asks a big question, which will be more than a minute of an answer, but let's try to keep it succinct if we can. He's been in the business for 35 years with personalized learning for students and families of various educational programs, and points out that repeatedly he encounters situations where the senior leadership basically gives lip service to this idea without actually being able to facilitate that being deployed. So again, with your experiences, how do you recommend dealing with this kind of situation?
No, it's a fair point Michael brings. I think we have all gone through that cycle, and more so when tough times, budgets are tough. So with leadership, I've been experienced that a little bit myself. The pushback typically sometimes comes from because it's a function of time and budget. And whilst leadership may have intent to drive the personalization exercise, but they may not have the time or the budget for it. What has happened now with a lot of technology advancements, though, is the cost of personalization has come down, as has the effort to personalize, right? So both effort, time, and cost of personalization has come down, which makes it much more amenable now for leadership to accept and drive initiatives such as these. So I think, Michael, hopefully, post 35 years, you'll see some better traction on the effort to personalize, given that it's much more easier to do now where we are.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you so much. We're out of time. There's a handful of questions left, and we will follow up with you individually to get those answered for you. I just want to thank Lead Squared and Prithvi for helping us get this together. Thank you, Inside Higher Ed, for your help as well. And thank all of you for joining us, for your engagement, and for your amazing questions along the way. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully this inspired you, and have a great rest of your Thursday and great week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
You.